Well, over the past few months, as you know, Australia's been in the grip of a devastating bushfire season. Over 10 million hectares have now burnt across New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria and Western Australia. And to date, almost 3,000 homes have been destroyed. Now, in human terms, tragically, the death toll now stands at 29, with an elderly Cobargo man dying from severe burns overnight. Now, you've heard what I've had to say about the frauds who want to make this fire season and its severity all about climate change and nothing else. You've also heard the opposition leader. You can see it, you can smell it, you can touch it. He throws out the science in order to conflate smoke pollution with carbon dioxide, the emissions demon, which of course you know can't be seen and has no smell. I don't know about you, but I've had enough of the misinformation masquerading as fact online and across once reputable media outlets, trying to push the agenda that these recent fires are the direct result of Australia's climate policies or, as some claim wrongly, lack thereof. On this point, I might remind people, including the former Prime Minister and his former Foreign Minister, that the Morrison government's climate policies are the very same policies that Malcolm Turnbull himself took to Paris. So tonight, let's park the spin and have some fact-based analysis. I'm joined now by two experts in fire management who together have over 100 years' experience. So if you want to talk about people who know what they're talking about, these two men are as expert as it gets. Roger Underwood is a former district and regional forester out of Western Australia with over 60 years' experience in bushfire science, planning and operations. He joins me tonight from Perth, and with him, and hearing me in Melbourne, is the wonderful David Packham OAM. Now, he's a scientist, formerly with the CSIRO and an honorary research fellow at Monash University, who has over 50 years' experience examining bushfires and ways to reduce their impact. I couldn't get a better panel to discuss all the science. Welcome, gentlemen, to you both. I'm going to start, if I can, with you, please, Roger, there in Perth. You wrote a terrific article in The Quadrant. It's a magazine. People can get it online. I read a copy of it myself just over the weekend. But you make the point and you say, I reject the blame it on climate change position because it has two killer flaws. Firstly, it ignores fuels, which are a main contributor to uncontrollable fires during a drought. And secondly, it provides no practical solutions to the immediate problem. Both of these factors render the climate change argument utterly unsustainable, indeed ridiculous. How worried are you about the tone of debate in recent weeks?
I'm very worried. I think that the tone of debate has gone downhill disastrously, along with the fires. The focus on the real problem, the problems that it's possible to fix, seems to have been lost, and we're mired in a debate about issues that have no solution, or if they do have a solution, it's not a solution that's going to have any benefit in terms of bushfires for many, many years, perhaps another 20 years. So it's been a very disappointing development in Australian politics and Australian media, Australian bushfire management.
All right, David, I want to bring you in because, I mean, I started the show tonight talking about the hyperbole in the debate, the conversation, particularly in the media, I have to say. It's also in the online, but you expect the media, I think, to be stronger on fact. Unprecedented, never happened before, worst ever. Put these fires, if you can, into some sort of historical context for people.
Well, I suppose the disaster fires, the biggest one we've ever had in Victoria at least, was a third or a fifth of Victoria burnt in fires hotter under weather conditions much more severe than what we've just had on, I think it was the 6th of February 1851.
1851.
Well, since then we've been doing it in a pretty regular fashion. In fact, if you look at them all and average them out, you get about one of these disaster fires in Victoria every 30 years. We have, however, managed to make our fuels heavier and more dangerous than they've ever been before. And so we might be increasing that frequency, not because there's a change in the climate, which is climate's job. It's the best data set I've been able to analyse is about 1 degree per century, so perhaps we've gone up a degree or so, which with calculations shows that that would have made a difference of about 3% in the fire's intensity, rate of spread and flame height. Now, the other 97% is fuels. So I'm not going to get the slightest bit interested, and Roger's absolutely right, it is irrelevant to these fires that we've got going now. And what is not irrelevant is the fuels. They have never been higher in the time there's been human habitation here, 50, 60,000 years or so.
Roger, I want to bring you in on this point about fuel load and fire intensity. I mean, fire to run needs an ignition point, it needs oxygen, and it obviously needs fuel. The ignition point we know in Australia is often arson. It can be unintended human intervention, and obviously can be fire, lightning strikes. Oxygen, well, we'll leave that where it is. People will understand that point. But take us through fuel load. I mean, David's just talking there about heavy fuel. This is fuel on the forest floor. What does that mean? And explain to people how build up over time can exponentially increase intensity. How does that work?
Well, the mistake that many people make is that they think that Australian forests are similar to those in the Northern Hemisphere. The Northern Hemisphere hardwood forests, the litter that falls every year, the leaves and the bark and the twigs, they rot away. In the Australian eucalypt forest, that doesn't happen. The material that is shed from the trees every year, the dry leaves, the dry bark, the twigs, the scrub, it builds up, and it builds up and builds up until it becomes tons and tons in weight on the floor of the forest. And if you get a drought, all of that fuel dries out and becomes available for to burn. And the more fuel you've got, the hotter the fire. Anyone who's lit a fire in their lounge room realises that you can make it hotter by putting another log on. That's exactly what happens in the forest. The more logs that go on, the more fuel that goes on, the more fierce the fire. And when you actually go out there and you weigh the fuel, you'll find that in a normal, say a stringy bark forest in eastern Australia or Western Australia, you can get fuel building up at a rate of more than a tonne per hectare per annum. And once that happens, once you get to about 5 or 6 or 7, up 8 tonnes per hectare, which will happen after about 5 or 6 years, the fire will become so intense that human beings cannot stand in front of it, they cannot suppress it. And the simple physics of the matter is, as David can talk about this more better than I can, but the simple physics is, if you double the fuel weight, you increase the intensity of the fire by 4. And if you do it again, you increase it by 16, so that you get this exponential effect of increasing fire intensity as the fuel builds up. And what you saw in some of these forests in New South Wales that have been burning recently, these are forests that have not been burnt for 30 years, and they might be carrying 50 tonnes per hectare of dry fuel. And when that catches alight and it burns, even on a relatively mild day, it doesn't have to be a hot day, if that catches alight, you get a crown fire. No firefighting force known to man anywhere in the world will be capable of stopping it. It's as simple as that.
I mean, this is a point I want to go to, David. I mean, I sat down and read the Royal Commission report, all 5 volumes in Victoria, and expert after expert, submission after submission. There's no politics there. These are all experts like your good self in this area, and it's demonstrable that hazard reduction burns work. So why are we not on this issue listening to the experts?
Well, this is one of the things that I really can't understand. Now, Roger identified 4 groups of people. He's twice as clever as I am, because I only identified 2. And the 2 identified who gain out of these disasters, these regular disasters we have, were the Greens, because 2 years ago we all decided that they would gain because they could blame climate change on, or the fires on climate change. That helps them. The other is the fire agencies, because the fire agencies over the last century or so have failed every time to control the fires. They generate a myth that give them more resources than they can control. We give them more resources and they fail. And we give them more resources and they fail. And the calls are out again. Give them more aeroplanes. They've got 500 to play with now and they have still failed.
Just on that point, so then, you know, I've read a lot of these inquiries, but as I said, particularly the Royal Commission. If we have another Royal Commission, or if we have more inquiries that they keep coming back and saying the same thing, aren't we just putting off the inevitable and having basically a political debate when what we should be doing is going into these fire trails, opening them up and doing the burns as we've been told for many years now that we should be?
Well, without doubt that there's only a few times at which you can be effective under these fire conditions. As Roger pointed out, the fuels are such that the fire intensity is many, many times. And if I can just give you a few figures, for example, the fire intensity, don't worry about the units, the maximum that you can put out. Doesn't matter what you've got, what equipment, bulldozers, tankers,
the entire army,
the whole lot is round about 3 megawatts per metre. Forget the units, just remember the 3. What we got on Black Saturday was around about 70. What we got in the New South Wales fires was somewhere around about the 35.
So no hope in hell, basically.
No hope in hell. And the only thing you can do is to control the fuels. And as Roger pointed out, if you halve the fuels, your fire intensity goes down by a quarter. But our fuels at the moment, in Victoria in particular, are about 10 times greater than what they should be, which means our fire intensities are about 100. If we can bring those fuels back and improve the health of the forest at the same time, which is what it does, we have solved the problem.
All right, well, I've got to leave it there, but I mean, this is part of a debate that's going to keep going on for some time. Roger Underwood from Perth, thank you very much for your analysis tonight, and David Packham here with me in the studio. Look, I really hope people listen to you, but I look forward to any submissions you might make, and we'll keep talking about it. Thank you, David.
Okay.